Good day one and all. I'm so excited to film today's video because it is one that has been 3 years in the making. I meant to make this video so long ago, but things just got lost in the turmoil of life as they often do, and it just fell by the wayside and I ended up forgetting about it. In fact, I haven't really touched this computer in 2 years, but I recently dug it out, I've been playing with it, and I figure now is a great time to finally film this video. Today we're going to be taking a look at my Macintosh LC III. This was one of many vintage computers and a few vintage Macs that I got from school 3 years ago from an e-waste collection pile that was used as an art piece demonstrating, you know, the ecological effects of e-waste on the environment. And when the art exhibit was over, the people in charge of it let me dig through it and take a bunch of stuff home, and this Macintosh LC III was one of those things. I remember being just, I was over the moon when I found this thing because I had never owned a 68K Macintosh, and it's something that I've always wanted. Starting back more than 10 years ago, once in a while I would come across eBay looking at classic Macs like the all-in-one Macs or the LCs or the Quadras, and there was just some of them that I'd put in my watch list and I'd almost consider what if, but it just never happened. And so years later, when I finally found this thing, it was by far one of the most exciting finds of that day. I'm really excited to get to show you guys this very cool vintage computer today. The Macintosh LC III, this unit dates from 1993. It was one of the members of the LC family that were made from the early to mid 1990s. LC stands for low cost color because the Macintosh LC, the original Macintosh LC, which was introduced in 1990, was the first relatively low cost Macintosh that had color graphics. The original Macintosh LC retailed for about $2,500. In comparison, the other color Macs were the Macintosh II series, which started upwards of $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. So the LC was Apple's foray into a Macintosh with color graphics and a color display that was affordable enough for the average consumer. Now the original Macintosh LC could be sold with a floppy drive and a hard drive like this unit is, but it could also be sold in a configuration that had 2 floppy drives and no hard drive. There would actually be a cutout right here where a second floppy drive would be. And all Macintosh LCs had that little cutout. If it wasn't sold with a second floppy drive, it would just be a little plate here that would be knocked out had it been sold with a second floppy drive. Mac LCs that were sold with 2 floppy drives are very rare. Reportedly, less than 5% of all LCs sold were ones with 2 floppy drives. They were only for the education market, but even there, they were not popular at all. The vast majority of them were sold with a single drive and a hard drive. The Macintosh LC, interestingly, was purposely very crippled in its electronic design, and that's because Apple did not want it to compete with the Macintosh II line. For example, the Macintosh LC ran its CPU, 32-bit CPU, Motorola 68020. It ran it on only a 16-bit data bus. Apple purposefully did that to make the computer slow compared to the Macintosh II line. Also, the original Macintosh LC was, by design, limited to only 10 megabytes of RAM, whereas several members of the Macintosh II family could be upgraded to, I hope you're sitting down, 128 megs of RAM, which for computers that were introduced in 1989, 1990, that's just mind-blowingly incredible, 128 megs of RAM. So the Macintosh LC, while it was a valiant effort to bring color Mac computing to the average consumer, it was criticized for being so crippled in design so as to not compete with the Mac II. In 1992, Apple replaced the LC with the LC II. The LC II was equally crippled, but it did replace the 68020 CPU with a 68030, still on a 16-bit external data bus, and still limited to 10 megs of RAM. But this unit, the LC III, was the first LC that really wasn't crippled. The LC3 made a bunch of changes to the hardware. First of all, the LC3 retains the same 68030 CPU as the LC2. It runs at 25 MHz, but Apple finally gave it a full 32-bit external data bus, making it far faster. Another thing was that Apple removed the RAM limitation. So while the LC and LC2 were limited to 10 megs of RAM, the LC3 can take up to 36 megs of RAM. There's 4 megs on the motherboard, and you can put an additional 32 megs. So that's very nice. The reason Apple decided to uncripple the LC with the LC3 is because by the time the LC3 came out, Apple was in the process of replacing the Macintosh 2 line with the Macintosh Quadra line, and the Macintosh Quadra line all have 68040 CPUs, so there was no harm in making a 68030 based LC that was able to take advantage of its hardware without being crippled in any way. And they didn't have to worry about it competing with any of the Quadra models. So yeah, this unit, the LC3, is a much loved vintage Mac overall, because Apple finally removed all the design quirks that crippled its performance and expandability so much. So I'm so happy that I get to own a fully working, perfect working LC3, and one that's in fairly good condition too. This is working just fine. There's nothing wrong with it, which I'm so happy about. As you can see, it's a bit scratched up and it's quite yellowed, but I don't mind. None of the plastic is cracked. Macs from this era, from about 1993-94 up until 97-98, are notorious for having horrible plastic in them. Plastic that's just so weak. And just cracks for no reason. You look at it the wrong way and it splits in two. In fact, one of my Power Macs, my Power Mac 7300, which is from 1996 or 97, that thing, just so much of the plastic is broken on that thing. The power button's broken, the expansion slot cover inside it's broken. Just, you touch the plastic and it just crumbles to pieces. And I believe the LC3 is recent enough that it was affected by this horrible plastic quality, but interestingly, mine has no cracks or breaks in the plastic or anything. So I'm wondering if I just got lucky with this, or maybe I read wrong, I don't know. The LC3 has the exact same case design as the original LC and the LC2, so I'm thinking it might be possible that the LC3 was, the case for the LC3 was built on the same production line as the LC and LC2, and therefore maybe they were using the same plastic as they did on the LC and LC2, making it not so bad for cracking. I don't know. But at any rate, I'm glad that the plastic on this thing is still in good shape, just a bit scratched up from use and probably from being thrown in that e-waste pile. When I found this thing, it was in the middle of the e-waste pile. It had dozens, if not hundreds of pounds of equipment on top of it, so it's kind of a wonder that I was able to pull it out in one piece. It actually took me quite a while to dig all the stuff off it so I could pull it out. It's kind of funny. But yeah, I'm glad that this is in such good shape. The LC3 was sold alongside a sister model that came out a few months later, the LC3 Plus. The only difference is the LC3 Plus runs at 33 MHz instead of 25 MHz. And actually, it is very easy to convert an LC3 to an LC3 Plus simply by, I think, just by replacing a resistor on the motherboard or something like that. You're basically just reprogramming the motherboard to think it's an LC3 Plus rather than an LC3. So that's very cool. But it's not something I would do to this thing. I don't care to modify something like this. And then finally, in 1994, the LC3 and the LC3 Plus were replaced with the LC475 and the Quadra 605. The LC475 and the Quadra 605 are the same computer internally. They are, of course, 68040 base machines. The difference is, while the Quadra 605 had a new case design, the LC475 actually used the same old LC case, which I think is kind of interesting. So for that reason, I think the LC475 is kind of a cool computer, a 68040 in the same old-fashioned LC case, which I think looks kind of cooler than the Quadra 605's case, which is of course a bit rounder. Later LC475s actually did change the case design a little bit, but it still remained a little bit distinct from the Quadra 605. So kind of interesting. And I'm not sure, but I think you can buy an LC475 or Quadra 605 motherboard and stick it in one of these older LC models. I believe the motherboard will drop in and fit. Of course, another nice thing about all the LC models is just how small and light of a computer they are. It is a very small computer. It stands just 3 inches high, and it's light enough that you can pick it up with one hand. So kind of nice, doesn't take up too much room. Need to put it away in a closet or whatever, no problem. So we'll take a look around the back. So right there's your power supply, and this is your power switch. The LC series is one of the few Macs that do not use the keyboard's power key to turn on. It's a hard power switch, and that's the only method of turning it on and off. Your power goes in there, standard IEC connection. There's your monitor port, and of course, like many older Macs, probably most older Macs, Apple chose to use a proprietary monitor connection. So in order to use a standard VGA monitor, you have to use an adapter. And luckily, I have such an adapter. 2 serial ports, they are labeled printer and modem. SCSI port. Apple desktop bus port for your keyboard and mouse. And audio out and microphone in ports. And I've never tried the microphone port. I'll have to find some sound recording software sometime and give that a try. If we look at the bottom, there's your exhaust fan. A single fan cools everything. That's the internal speaker, so this thing, like most Macs, does have an internal speaker. Very nice, good quality speaker. Here's your info sticker, Apple Computer Incorporated, Cupertino, California. This was assembled in the USA, which is neat. It's universal power input. Copyright 1993. And there's your serial number up there. To get inside this thing, you normally have a screw right there that you've got to take out. This thing just didn't have a screw in it, either that or I took it out and never put it back in and forgot all about it. But you don't need it, because once the screws are out, there's just a couple of plastic latches right here and here, so you pull those up. And the top cover lifts right off. And there's the internals of the computer. There's your fan, there's your speaker. It's a 16 ohm quarter watt speaker. There's the floppy drive, 3.5 inch 1.4 megabyte floppy drive, so you can use your ordinary 1.4 megabyte floppy disks in this. And it's a very cool drive. It's a Sony drive, so it's a very high quality drive. It's very quiet when it operates, but the coolest thing about the drive, the floppy drives in these early Macs have a electromechanical eject. And actually it has a mechanically assisted inject. So when you put in a disk, when it gets to the point where it would normally snap down into the drive on an ordinary floppy drive, this one has a sort of a spring-loaded mechanism that almost sucks the disk out of your hand. So it makes for a very smooth motion when you put in a floppy drive. And when it's time to eject the floppy drive, that's all electromechanical. You drag the floppy icon on the desktop into the trash can, and an electric motor turns, and it electromechanically ejects the disk. So very, very cool. Only in a Mac will you see something like that. Here's the hard drive. It's an 80 megabyte hard drive, which, while it seems tiny, it was actually the middle option for a hard drive. The base option was a 40 megabyte drive, and then your high-end option was a 160 megabyte drive. So I got the middle option with this. It's a Quantum ProDrive ELS. I used to have a Quantum ProDrive ELS IDE drive, a 120 meg drive. That drive has since died, and I no longer have it. This is, of course, a SCSI drive. Most early Macs used SCSI hard drives, which kind of sucks because SCSI hard drives are so hard and more expensive to get a hold of than IDE drives. It's gotten to a point now where it's actually not really a viable option to buy a replacement hard drive for one of these vintage Macs anymore. If the hard drive goes bad, the best option is to get not a replacement hard drive, but a little device that you can buy called a SCSI to SD. And a SCSI to SD is a little card that plugs into the SCSI cable, and you put a micro SD card into it. So the micro SD card is your storage. And I think that's a much better option than trying to find a hard drive, a likely used and possibly worn out hard drive, and hoping that it stays working. I think we've gotten to a point now, these Macs are old enough and the hard drives they take are old enough that it's just not a viable option anymore. I wish somebody could have made a SCSI to IDE converter so you could put a normal IDE hard drive in one of these. What few of those I've been able to find on the internet, they're made for industrial use and they're a couple $100 to buy, so not a viable option. SCSI to SD is like $50–$60, still not great, but certainly better than the alternatives, and of course being a solid state option, it's not going to die on you, so it really is the best option in the end. Luckily for me, I have 2 spare SCSI hard drives that I can use in the event that the hard drives in any of my vintage Macs die. I've got 2 other vintage Macs besides this one. I've got my Power Macintosh 7300, which you guys have seen before, and I've got a Power Macintosh 7200, which I've yet to make a video of. And I also have another Power Macintosh 7200 that's missing a couple of parts, so I've relegated it to a parts machine for the other 7200 and the 7300, so that's one source of a spare drive, because that does have a good hard drive in it. And then I've got another hard drive that's in an external SCSI hard drive case that I got from the e-waste pile with that same haul, so that's another source of a spare hard drive if I ever need one. So luckily, I've got a couple of spare drives to go. After that, if I ever need another hard drive, I guess I'll be buying the SCSI to SD. But yeah, there's the hard drive in this machine, luckily still working well. Let me tell you, 80 megs doesn't go a long way in one of these. I actually have this filled to the brim with the software that I'm gonna demonstrate to you guys, which I don't think I've ever done with any other computer. I've never completely filled the hard drive of a vintage computer, but I have with this one. So I may actually decide in the future to replace this hard drive with one of the spares I've got, since the spares are much larger. One of them's 1.2 gigabytes, the other's 4 gigabytes. There's the power supply. It's a TDK power supply. These things are notorious for having capacitors go bad, which cause them to stop working and the whole computer just won't turn on anymore. That's extremely common on the LCs, but for some reason mine is still working fine. I've never had a problem with this. Computer turns on every time. I don't know, maybe the LC3 wasn't affected as much as the LC and LC2. Maybe this power supply's been replaced or repaired at some point in its life. Maybe I've just gotten really lucky, but normally it's extremely common for these to go bad due to bad capacitors. That's okay. I assume it would be fairly easy to replace the capacitors if the time ever comes. So our capacity on this, 5 volt, 3 1/4 amps, so that's, let's call it 17–18 watts. 12 volt, 3/4 of an amp, so we'll call that 9 watts, so 9 plus 17, 18, we'll call it 25–30 watts, so not a very high power power supply, so that's kind of neat. There's your motherboard. There's the Motorola 68030 CPU running at 25 megahertz. And I have installed the optional math coprocessor. It's installed in this socket. It's a Motorola 68882 math coprocessor. You can get these on eBay fairly inexpensively. I think I bought this for like $10 a couple of years ago. So I figured, why not? So that's pretty cool. Here's the RAM expansion slot. This takes ordinary 72-pin RAM, exactly the same RAM that PCs of the time would use. So that's excellent. You know, a lot of Macs take proprietary RAM. Some Macs used RAM that had to have ECC on it. But the LC3 is one of the nice Macs that take ordinary 72-pin SIMs. So that's very nice. So there's 4 megs of RAM on the motherboard. I've installed another 4 meg SIM for a total of 8 megs of RAM. I got this thing with 20 megs of RAM installed, and I had promptly upgraded it to 36 megs of RAM. But the problem is, when you have that much RAM in a system like this, when you boot it up, it goes bong, and then it just sits there with no display for like 30 seconds while it counts up the RAM. So I've purposefully downgraded the RAM so that it doesn't take as long to boot up. You turn it on, it goes bong, and then in like 3 or 4 seconds you have an image on the screen. Plus, you know, 36 megs of RAM is kind of ridiculous when the hard drive is only 80 megs. Like, what kind of computer has half the amount of RAM that's available in hard drive space? So it's kind of crazy. So yeah, I figured make it a bit more period correct. This is my oldest Mac, so I want to make it really period correct. So I figured, with the software that I've installed in this, I found that 4 megs wasn't really enough. Sometimes I got out of memory errors, and I don't want to enable virtual memory. I want to keep virtual memory turned off. So from what I've found so far, 8 megs of RAM seems to be a good amount to have. Right there is the video memory expansion slot. This thing has, I think, 512K of video memory standard, and then I believe you can add another 256K through that slot. Half a meg of video memory, you don't get high color modes on this. I don't think anyway. For what I've gotten on this, you get like 256 colors at like 640 by 480 or maybe 800 by 600. Not a whole lot. I actually don't know what resolution this thing runs at because it doesn't tell you. The adapter I have emulates a Macintosh high-resolution display, so the thing just thinks it's running on a Macintosh high-resolution display, and it won't tell me what the resolution is. It just says Macintosh high-resolution display, so it beats me. By the looks of it, I would say either 640 by 480 or 800 by 600. Yeah, your SCSI's right there. Hard drive, of course, uses an ordinary Molex connector, which plugs into the motherboard right there. Proprietary connection for the floppy drive, so unfortunately, if the floppy drive were to go bad, you can't stick a normal PC drive in here. Maybe you can, but not without some adapters and possibly modifications, and also, of course, because the OEM drive has an automatic eject mechanism, there's no eject button. So you'd have to drill a hole in the case if you wanted to put an ordinary floppy drive in there. Not a lot of people would opt for that, I don't think. Now, my 2 Power Macintoshes have floppy drives that are also electromechanical eject, but they are not the mechanical inject. They use an ordinary inject mechanism where you have to push the disk in all the way and it clunks down into the drive. Would one of those drives work in this? I don't know. Possibly. I've never really looked. But possibly. But I don't know. Your fan plugs in there. Speaker plugs in there. And you have your, what's called the PRAM battery. Your parameter RAM battery. Battery that keeps the clock and everything else running while the computer's turned off or unplugged. It takes a CR123 battery, 3.6 volt lithium battery. These are very standard batteries, very cheap to buy on eBay or wherever. And that cover's supposed to be like that. And yeah, I bought that battery a couple of years ago, still working, expires in 2025. So we're good to go. And then I guess the last thing to show in here is this right here. This is called a processor direct slot or PDS slot. And this was a slot that was used on all the LCs pretty much. It was used on the Macintosh Color Classic, and it was used on the early all-in-one Power Macintoshes. And actually it was used on a couple of the members of the Macintosh II series as well, because the last models of the Macintosh II series were Macintosh LC based. This slot's kind of interesting because it could sort of be thought of as a sort of predecessor to an AGP slot. It's called a processor direct slot for a reason. It has lines going directly to the CPU, so a card plugged into this slot has direct communication with the CPU, and as such, all Macs that had a PDS slot only had one slot, and I believe they always had just the PDS slot. A Mac wouldn't have a PDS slot and other slots in it. It would just have the PDS slot. So this could be used to add an expansion card, it could be used to add an Ethernet card, it could be used to add some sort of card, like maybe a music synthesizer or something like that. I don't know. I know an Ethernet card was a popular upgrade. Possibly a video card, stuff like that. And there's a little knockout right there, and that's where the card's port would go if it had a port. So, I think that's about all there is to show for the grand internal tour of this thing. What I'll do now is I'll put the thing back together, set it up over by the other computers, and we will turn this thing on and play around with it. I've got a few pieces of software that I can show working on this thing, and I'm pretty excited to do that. Alright, we're all plugged in, ready to turn on. Now this is something you guys might not remember. This is connected to the computer. This is an external SCSI CD-ROM drive. It's made by a company called Dynatech. This is something else that I got from the e-waste pile that day, and this thing is freaking great. It's a SCSI drive, so it plugs into the SCSI connector on the Mac, and it gives you a CD-ROM drive, and it works practically out of box. You get basic functionality out of box, and you can download the Apple CD software that Apple distributed with their own CD-ROM drives for their Macs. You download that software, and that gives you extra functionality, gives you a CD player program, gives you support for more CD-ROM formats, stuff like that. So while you don't really need a CD-ROM drive for a Mac like this, you can get by just fine with the floppy drive. You can install the system software and most programs you want right through the floppy drive. But if you have one of these, it is a nice thing to have. It can be very useful at times. This is from about 1997. The drive inside it, it's actually a CD burner drive. It's a CDR drive. You can see right there. See if we can get a focus on that. Compact disc recordable. Very cool. And it's got a headphone jack and a volume wheel, so when you're playing audio CDs, you can listen to the audio through the headphone jack. There's also a set of RCA audio connections on the back, so you can plug it into a stereo system or a television set or whatever. Very cool. Of course, unfortunately, SCSI, the audio cannot be routed through the SCSI, so it can't play. Whoops! It can't play out the computer's internal speaker. So the only way to get audio sound out is through headphones or an audio system connected to the RCA audio out jacks. The drive inside this thing is a JVC drive, and if you didn't know, way back in the early days of CD burning, JVC made CD burner drives. It's a JVC model XRW2010. It's a 4x drive, 4x read, 2x burn. Very slow drive, very quiet drive as a result. So I've got that plugged in. I suppose I can demonstrate it. We can put a music CD in and demonstrate that. For peripherals, I have an Apple design keyboard and an Apple desktop bus mouse too. And we're going to be looking at things through this Sony Trinitron VGA monitor connected through this VGA adapter. So, light off. We'll turn the drive on first. And then we'll turn the Mac on. And another reason I love the Macintosh LC III so much is that where the original LC and the LC II have this cutesy little ding sound that they make when they turn on, The LC3 actually uses the Quadra startup chime, which is my favorite classic Mac startup chime. So we'll turn it on here, listen for the bong. The hard drive's doing a little thing where it spins down and then spins back up. Sometimes it does that, I don't know why. Oh, I think I have a CD in the CD drive, that's why it's waiting to boot. But here it goes. We are booting into Macintosh System 7.1. That's the earliest version of the system software that this thing can run. The original version that it shipped with. Now, when I got this thing, it was running System 7.5.3, and I initially, when I wiped the hard drive, I initially put System 7.5.5 on it. I chose later to put System 7.1 on it because this is my oldest Mac, and so I want as early of a Mac experience as I can get from this. So I put the oldest version of the system software on this that it'll run. Up until a couple of years ago, my mentality was with vintage computers was always run the newest operating system that runs well and that all the hardware works properly in and stuff like that. Well, now because I own so many computers, my mindset has somewhat shifted to run what's the most period correct operating system, or even in some cases run the earliest operating system that a computer will run where all the hardware still works properly and stuff like that. So I decided to stick with the original System 7.1 on this thing. My Power Macintosh 7200, which you'll see in a video someday, that runs System 7.6.1, so that's the Mac that I can use to run a newer version of System 7. So we're running anyhow. Start by taking a look at the About This Macintosh screen. And it says Macintosh LC III, 8 megs of RAM. And of course here it says System Software Z1 7.1. It's kind of interesting. Some Macs that shipped with System 7 required a version of System 7 that had a piece of software called an enabler built into it. And I'm not entirely sure what an enabler does or why it's needed. But my best guess based on what I've been able to find is that basically a computer that was released after the version of the system software that it ships with might have some hardware features that system software as a result doesn't support. So the enabler is there to provide that extra support features, whatever the software needs in order to properly interface with all the hardware. So System 7.1 is, I believe, from 1992. This computer came out in 1993, so naturally it would need an enabler so the system software works properly. But you get a bit of a nice surprise when you use a version of system software specifically for a Mac as opposed to just a general retail version of that system software. I need a floppy disk to demonstrate to you what that is. So we'll grab a floppy disk. Now I'll stick a floppy disk in the drive and take a look here. You'll see once I get the disk in a certain way, it practically sucks it out of my hand. It's kind of nice, it feels good. And there the floppy disk shows up, opens up on the desktop. ClarisWorks is one of the software packages I will be demonstrating to you, so I installed that from floppies. So we'll go ahead and close that, and we're going to erase the disk. And I'll just clear the name there. Now what's kind of cool is when you use a version of the system software that had to be specifically for a particular Mac because it has an enabler, one of the nice quirks you get is that Apple actually took the time to replace the generic Macintosh logo with a little picture depicting the actual Mac. So instead of the generic compact Mac logo that the system software would normally use for a dialogue like this one, there's actually a little LC. And I think that's really neat. I think that's kind of neat that they took the time to do that. Sound a bit like Doug DeMuro when I say that, but I do think it's pretty cool. So we'll let it finish formatting here. It's almost done. We can't do anything else. You can see the mouse cursor can't even move. Barely. So yeah, the floppy drive uses same old 1.4 megabyte floppy disk that you'd use in a PC. And actually, when you put an IBM formatted floppy disk in this Mac, it does recognize it. I forget if it was built into the system software, if it was something I had to install. It's been a couple of years since I actually installed the system software on this Mac. But there's an extension that allows it to read IBM formatted floppies, so that's kind of nice. So, I will now eject the disk, and you do that by dragging it to the trash. You throw it away, which I think is kind of funny. But you'll see it pop out. And I think that's kind of neat. So that's cool. If we open up the hard drive here, you'll see that 80 meg hard drive, I've got 12 megs remaining. And I don't have that many programs on here. There's just not a lot of space. The LC 475 and Quadra 605 that succeeded this, the base hard drive was, I believe, 160 megs, and the optional upgraded drive was 210 megs. So a really big upgrade there. I've got Adaptec Toast installed. That's software that lets you mount CD-ROM images, and you can actually burn a CD-ROM disk with the CD burner. Give that a quick open here. This is from 1999, very recent program. See there, sees it actually identifies the drive, JVC XRW2010. There's some neat options here. Ooh, that's hilarious. Notice it says firmware version 1.51. I was recently Googling this drive just to see what info I could find of it. And one of the pieces of info I found was that version 1.51, specifically, of the firmware, is very buggy and should be upgraded if possible. That's hilarious. Well, be damned if I'll be able to find a firmware upgrade for it. That's kind of hilarious. Well, the drive works fine for me, so that's toast. I've got Stuffit Expander installed. That's pretty much a requirement for a vintage Mac, because a lot of software comes in Stuffit archives. And there it's open. Of course, one of the things you learn when you're a lifelong DOS and Windows user to get used to on a Mac is that some programs can open and not have any Windows associated with them. But you can see the menu bar up top has changed. So I can go about Stuffit Expander. And there's another quite recent program, 1999. And this is the application menu. That's how you know what programs are open and how to switch between them if they have no windows to click on. But I'll just go to File and Quit. And we're back to the Finder. I have Microsoft Office 3.0 installed, so Word, Excel, PowerPoint. So we'll open up Microsoft Word. Word 5.1a from 1992. And there you go. And I can type, and it works. Very cool. Very nice. Similar to the Windows version, which Mac users weren't really fond of. And I believe it was with Office 2001 that either Office 97 or Office 2001, sorry, not Office 97, Office 98 or Office 2001, where Microsoft completely rebuilt the code and made a Mac-specific user interface that Mac users appreciated a bit more. So I'll open an example file here. Newsletter. Opens in a new window. And you see a lot of nice things in here. No color, which is too bad. Robots! They're taking over our employment. Very cool. So we'll get out a Word here. Oh, do I want to save changes? I did not make changes, so no. What's the README look like? Boring. And I assume the documents created with this are compatible with Microsoft Word for Windows. So that's nice. We can open Microsoft Excel. It's a shame. If I could set this monitor to 60 Hertz, I would, so I'm sorry about that. Like I said, it doesn't give you any options for adjusting the resolution or anything. So yeah, there we have Excel. You can type in formulas up here, do all the same stuff you'd normally do. Very nice. Microsoft Excel version 4.0 from 1992. It's kind of interesting. They chose an entirely different style for the About window than they did for Microsoft Word. I don't know. College expenses. I remember looking at this one and laughing at what they decided the cost of college is. Update references to unopened documents. So there's actually references in here that reference completely other files. So I will. And you can see the number of recalculations it's doing. This program is math coprocessor aware, so it does see that Motorola 68882 math coprocessor, and it's making use of that. So that's nice. And I believe in the About window there says math coprocessor present. Now, I'd like to make a chart. I think I'll open another file, see if there's something that can make a chart. Annual budget. Doing some calculations. You're kind of surprised with how slow this computer is for some things, but then you got to remember it's only 25 megahertz. This might be chart material. So if I do that and go new chart, sure. Oh, there you go. Nice colors. What more do you need? Very cool. I'll show you PowerPoint next. Now PowerPoint's kind of a neat bird because PowerPoint was originally written for the Macintosh. It was on the Macintosh before it was on Windows. So we'll open PowerPoint here. PowerPoint 3.0. Alright, so we're in PowerPoint, and although it looks extremely different from PowerPoint, more recent PowerPoint versions, you can see some things that are familiar. You got the familiar title box and content box. If we go to the About page, Microsoft PowerPoint 3.0, 1992. Color palette, color scheme, clip art, and template by Jenna Graphics. Now, this has some really cool example presentations in it. This one was really nice. It's 20 slides. Each slide has a different theme. It's a showcase of all the built-in themes, and it's very nice. Extremely early 90s. It takes quite a while to render everything, so if I go into the slide sorter here, some interesting graphical glitches that causes some weird colors. Like right now, the scroll bar arrows are pink for some reason. And you can see it takes quite a while to render all the slides. Luckily, it'll only do up to the first 6, because that's all we can see right now. Won't do all 20. Or it'll do the first 9, I guess. But I will we will view the presentation. It'll advance on its own. And I won't bother reading any of this. It should be big enough for you to read if you want. Ooh, pretty. Focus, however, might be another challenge. Nice drawing of the space shuttle there. Apparently Jenna Graphics had a service of some sort. Maybe you brought in a digital image and it would do a printout or something. Or maybe the other way around, and/or. Very, very nice. It's kind of sad, you know, in your adult life, at least in university, we were specifically taught, do not make use of themes in PowerPoint. If you're making a PowerPoint presentation, and it's a professional PowerPoint presentation, use a blank white background and plain black text and nothing else. And I think that's, I mean, I get why they say that, but I think it's also way too bad, because at least old versions of PowerPoints had some pretty neat looking themes. Pretty fun. Although, I think some of these gaudy 90s pastel color themes might not pass so much today. So you can see this thing's not quite powerful enough to render some of the animations. Some of the animations are a bit choppy, particularly when large amounts of text have to move on the screen. It's a bit choppy, but no big deal. Cape Town. I think that was very cool. There's actually a second volume of that, but I will not take the time to show that. I don't want this to draw on for too long. They're not as interesting anyway. The first slideshow that I just showed you, the themes are nicer. But that's PowerPoint. Very cool. I shall show you, well, I'll show you ClarisWorks next. Now, I installed ClarisWorks because ClarisWorks is actually an extremely nostalgic piece of software for me. ClarisWorks is an office suite. It competed with Microsoft Works and office suites like that. So it's not a full, you know, hardcore office suite like Microsoft Office. It's something a bit more lower end. It's an integrated office suite. So like Microsoft Works. So you get a word processor, a drawing program, a painting program, a spreadsheet program, a database program, and on the Macintosh, a communications program, which is a terminal emulator. On the Windows version of ClarisWorks, communications just opens hyperterminal. So ClarisWorks is extremely nostalgic for me because when I was in elementary school, so from 1999 to 2005, the computers we had, at least the computers we had in the early years of elementary school, had ClarisWorks on them. I don't remember if both the Windows 3.1 machines and the Windows 95 machines had ClarisWorks, but at least one of the two did, and I freaking loved playing in ClarisWorks. I did everything. I went into the word processing to type random stuff. I obviously loved the drawing and painting programs. Those were everybody's favorites. I would once in a while go into the spreadsheet program just because I thought spreadsheets were cool. Just type random stuff in the spreadsheet. But I obviously never touched the database or communications. But ClarisWorks, very, very nostalgic to me. It's pretty much, it's one of only two really nostalgic pieces of software for me. The other is Ski-Free on Windows 3.1. And of course Windows 3.1 itself is quite nostalgic for me, as is Windows 95. But we'll open a word processor here, and you can see it is a word processor. I don't know if they give you examples. We'll take a look here. Document type, word processing, stationery. Event flyer sounds interesting. So ClarisWorks was on the Macintosh and Windows. Each version of ClarisWorks had a parallel versions for both operating systems. The only exception is ClarisWorks 2.0, which did not have a Windows version. The Windows version skipped from 1.0 to 3.0. This is 4.0 from 1996. And that's probably what was on the computers in my elementary school. It would have been either 4.0 or 5.0. Unless it was on the Windows 3.1 machines, then it would have been 1.0 because it was the only version that run on Windows 3.1, unless you have Win32s installed. Interesting thing here. So that's the word processor. New. So we'll open the painting one first. The drawing ones and the painting ones are exactly the same. It's just that the tools are different. And oh my goodness, so nostalgic when I open the ClarisWorks painting program. You get this extremely wide gamut of color, which is very nice. I think I'll choose a pretty purple there. Not a lot of resolution when you move the mouse quickly. Not on a 25 megahertz machine anyway. And then what made this the MS Paint killer, yeah, it was this. I didn't mean to open it in its own window. There we go. You had these gradients, these built-in gradients, and you could choose one. Oops. I guess I will choose the paint can here. You could choose a gradient, can do this. And oh my goodness, that is so cool. Let me see if I can find a brighter one. This one. And we all used to just make pictures just like this using these gradients. This was the MS Paint killer. It really was. Just thinking about it. Ooh, yeah. Excellent. I am artist. So cool. Very, very cool, especially if you had something that could display at least 256 colors. What a neat little program. Let's close that. I will not save it, despite it being incredibly beautiful. The drawing program is similar. Mostly tools for making shapes. And take a color, and there's no spray can. Can I draw a shape of that color? Yes, I can. So you could do a gradient. Let's try this one. And do that. Oh, it filled in that one. Fair enough. Do that, and boop. And do that, and whoop. Excellent. And I believe they give you some example drawings. Let's take a look here. Yeah, so an example of business cards here. And these are all, well, I thought they might be all individual shapes, but they're clearly not. Well, I guess there's some individual shapes here. Let's find another example. Let's go Language Arts Project. Picture, oh, it's one of these Mad Libs things. Oh my goodness. Picture My Story by Trend. This is a story about my pet penis. My penis is my best friend. He or she, we're not sure, likes to walk with me when I go to jail. After jail, I like to have a snack. Formaldehyde is a good snack. When I eat formaldehyde, my penis likes to have a lick too. A+. Oops. What's this? Oh, they give you pictures that you're supposed to put in the blanks. Whoops. Well, I got creative. That's it for the drawing program. We'll take a look at the spreadsheet program. And there's the spreadsheet program. Wonder if it'll take in formulas like Microsoft Excel, or if they couldn't do that for legal reasons. Equals sum A1, A2. Nope. That's interesting. Comma? Oh yeah. So a comma works, but not a colon. Fair enough. What if I just type another number in here and go equals sum A1 colon A3. So if I do comma here, will it add all three? No, it will not. So there might be some differences with Excel. Fair enough. So yeah, that's what what I'll show for ClarisWorks here. That's pretty neat. Very nostalgic program for me. Is there anything left? Oh, there's Adobe Acrobat Reader. I have Adobe Acrobat Reader installed. Adobe Acrobat Reader 3.01. I'm kind of surprised, what the heck? This didn't happen before. That's interesting. Said ATM wasn't installed. ATM is Adobe Type Manager. I read something about some people having to install that before they installed Acrobat, but I didn't have to. It was working. Well, screw that noise. I don't know why it's doing that. It worked perfect the first time I ran it. Well, whatever. I've stopped caring. We're not looking at Adobe Acrobat Reader. I apologize, but it did work, and it renders PDFs extremely slowly on a 25 megahertz 68030. Let's demonstrate the CD. So I have a music CD here. I have KT Tunstall. I'll have to plug a set of speakers into the headphone jack so you can hear it. Speakers. I have a set of battery-powered amplified speakers here that I recently bought at a thrift store, and the battery contacts were very corroded, but I cleaned them and they work. Alright, so the volume wheel is on the drive itself, and there should be enough volume to drive the speakers so you can hear, hopefully. I will open Apple CD audio player, and I can only play 28 seconds or less, and we'll click play. And yes, that's the volume cranked up all the way, not a lot of amplification. Very cool. Very cool. And there's an eject button right here. Very neat. Apple CD audio player. Now, I think we've run out of all the programs that I've installed. There's still the stuff like you get the standard Macintosh toys, like the little puzzle. Oh, they've changed it. In System 6 and earlier, it was just numbered 1 to 15. I guess in System 7, they actually changed it to the rainbow apple. Oh, that's very cool. Anyway, you click a million times until either you kill yourself or you solve the puzzle. So cool. Show you the control panels here. Just the usual stuff. If I go into monitors, you can see we can change the color depth. I can go into black and white, and now it looks like a far older Mac. And yeah, if we go to options, select monitor type, Macintosh high-res display or 640 by 400 high-res. If I click that, ooh, what if it makes it so the monitor doesn't work anymore? I assume it's gonna just wait until we restart. I'll restart then. Watch this, the monitor's gonna... No, it worked! And we indeed have lower resolution now. Will we have higher color depth? Because 256 colors, while it's for the most part fine for the classic Mac OS, there's obviously certain things where it doesn't look as nice at only 256 colors, like the example PDFs for Acrobat Reader. They wanted high color, so they didn't look as nice as they otherwise would have. They had photographs and stuff in them. And for some reason, I think we're in black and white mode. Loading the extensions there. Oh, have QuickTime installed. I didn't know that. I didn't think I did. Yeah, we're in black and white for some reason. Monitors. Oh, aha! Yes! We now get thousands of colors. We get the 16-bit color mode by going to the very low resolution. Now I think other things for the most part look the same, so I guess the resolution we were running at before was 640 by 480. So that 512K of RAM does not get you far. So we'll restart here. So yeah, it does look like we are running in 640 by 480. So now the VGA adapter has a bunch of dip switches on it. They all mostly do. And I might be able to set the dip switches and give myself some more options for resolutions and stuff. But anyhow, we'll go into the sound control panel. And of course you have your built-in sounds. We'll crank the volume up here. And simple beep is my favorite. I just always liked how it sounded. Droplet. See, I always like simple beep. Simple beep's kind of interesting. Sound files of all the other classic Mac sounds are very easy to find on the internet, but you can't get one for Simple Beep, and the reason is because Simple Beep is not a sound file. Simple Beep's actually generated by the hardware itself. Oh, and that just reminded me, I haven't thought about this in a couple of years. That's another reason why I went with System 7.1 rather than 7.5, for example, is that for some reason, while the Simple Beep in System 7.1 sounds correct, System 7.5 does something, just some way it interfaces with the sound hardware. Simple Beep sounds different. It doesn't sound like a sort of a piano note like it's supposed to. It sounded like more of a square wave beep. It's very interesting. But System 7.5 on, for example, my Power Macs has the right Simple Beep sound, but for some reason System 7.5 on this thing, Simple Beep sounds weird, so I like my correct sounding Simple Beep. Well, I really think that's about all there is to show of this thing. I think we've gone through all the software I have installed. There would have been more if I hadn't run out of hard drive space and if Adobe Acrobat Reader had worked. I tried to install After Dark on this thing. The download that I did could not install no matter how I tried to get it to the Mac. I wrote the disk image with a PC, didn't want it. I wrote the disk image with a Mac because my USB floppy drive is Macintosh compatible, so I used the PowerBook G4 to write it. And this thing could see the disk then, but it still didn't want to work. I just opened the program and it wouldn't do anything, so I don't know what ails it, but fair enough, I suppose. So I can't show you After Dark, unfortunately. But yeah, I think we had a good run. I think this will be a good long video showing everything I have on here. If in the future I have more software installed, I might make another video just showing all that. Oh, there's one more thing that I'll show you guys just for fun. I have to look it up because I've long forgotten it, but there's a key combination you can press, and I think you have to press it at a certain time during the boot process to make the sad bong noise happen, the error sound that a Mac makes. Just like the startup sound, every Mac has a unique or maybe a somewhat unique error noise that it makes if the boot process failed, like if there's a memory error or something. So for most Macs, the error sound is kind of discomforting. I don't like any of the Mac error sounds. There's one that's kind of hilarious, but the rest of them are just sort of unsettling, including the one on this Mac. but I'll look it up and see how to invoke it, so I can do that for you. Okay, so I think I found out how to do it. First of all, they're called the chimes of death. I couldn't for the life of me figure out what they're called. So apparently how you do it is you go to restart, and while it's playing the startup chime, press Command and the power button on the keyboard. Command, power, and it'll invoke the chimes of death. Now I'm going to try and do this while holding the phone, so let's see if it works. Yeah, so it works. So that's the death chime on the Macintosh LC III. And there you can see all is well. So yeah, kind of a funny way to invoke the chimes of death, and apparently it works on many or perhaps all Macintoshes. So kind of neat, even the ones that don't make use of the power key. So this thing's starting up again, but I think that's all there is to show of this thing. Really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's been a long time coming. Like I said, I meant to do this literally years ago, but it just got pushed by the wayside. I threw the machine in a closet for a long time and just never touched it again. Recently, out of boredom, decided to pull it out while I was visiting Mom. Started playing with it. So glad that I did, and I'm really happy to get to put some software on this thing, play around with it, and ultimately make this video for you guys. So that is all there is to show of the Macintosh LC III from 1993. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.